If I can, let me call this committee meeting to order, and let us begin here on time. Welcome, everybody. Glad to see all the folks in here, and I especially want to thank the presenters today for being willing to come. I'm looking forward to this meeting as I learned so much from the individuals that will be speaking to us. So thank you for your time and for educating me. And members here, I'll tell you that we have hit the ground absolutely running. Just to give you a count, as of, I believe, 2 days ago now, we had 14 bills dropped and 2 resolutions, and yesterday and today more were dropped. And I want to stick on our goals. I will say that we talked about in the first meeting about thinking about safety, thinking about literacy, and good policy, and always putting students first. So as we begin this task, I want to thank you for the communication from you, the energy, the effort. I know that we're not in session tomorrow, and so many of you like to get home early on these days, but thank you for staying around with us. I also want to mention that we have got a standing subcommittee time that has been given to us. They'll be on Mondays in this room at 1 o'clock. And what we'll do is we've got an hour there, and we'll divide the 2 subcommittees up between 1 and 1:30 and 1:30 and 2. So just to make you aware of that. And we'll begin with that on next Monday with subcommittees members. So put that on your calendar in this room, and we'll be releasing that and what bills we're going to be looking at on Monday. With that, let's begin. I'm going to ask Representative Parris, do you mind opening us in prayer?
Let us bow our heads. Father, we thank you for this day and for this opportunity to serve your people. Lord, we ask that you look on all of us in this room today. Bless us with your knowledge, your wisdom, and your understanding. We ask that you look on our chairman and our co-chairs and lead them in the right way, Lord. We praise you for all of your blessings, seen and unseen. Like I said, guide us through this day and through this process. In your name we pray, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. All right, let's what I'm going to set up for you here. Speakers 15 minutes. I'm going to allow members an opportunity after that to ask a few questions. Members, educate yourself with your questions, but also know that we've got a packed schedule today, and we're going to need to drive through that schedule so that we can really hit the ground even harder next week, okay? Thank you. First one we have here is Department of Education. April Aldridge and Carrie Pritchard, would y'all come up? And what we have asked this group to come to speak to us on is one of our goals we've talked about is literacy. And we're going to turn it over to you, April and Carrie.
Carrie's getting that set up for us today. I would just first like to say thank you for the opportunity to be here. My name is April Aldridge, and I am currently serving as the Deputy Superintendent for the Office of Teaching and Learning at the Georgia Department of Ed. But I will tell you that that appointment has not come with a long stint of time. I'm actually about 20 days officially into my new role, but what I have been doing is preparing for about the last 26 years in the classroom as a building leader, as a district leader. And so I left my district about a little over a year ago and actually joined the Office of Rural Education and Innovation. And from there, I come to you today, and I first would like to say thank you to Chairman Irwin for having us here. Thank you to each of you for being here. And often people will say that literacy is about reading and writing. If you look that up in a definition, it would say the ability to read and write. But you and I know that literacy is about a lot more than just reading and writing. And so I'm pleased to be here today to represent 181 districts. 115 of them being rural, and our students in the state of Georgia, to talk to you about what the department is currently engaged in with our literacy efforts, and then some opportunities for us as we move forward and how we can continue to partner together, because that is really, really important in our literacy efforts. One of the main things that we are focused on at the department is certainly our work with the revision of the K-12 English Language Arts standards. This process has been very unique. Instead of involving a few individuals in this process, we started back in the summer, involved over 300 educators in a process where we have really been looking at the standards that we currently have. We've looked at public feedback, we've worked with citizens and academic review committees, and we are really being intentional about this set of standards so that we can focus on the structured literacy components that focus specifically on the K-5 foundation skills. We are also focusing on being intentional about providing standards that support multiple pathways and personalized learning needs for our high school students. As we continue to work on this process, our goal is to move that forward to and adopt these new standards, hopefully in the spring of 2023. That will largely be dependent on the continuing process of revision and then public comment. But once we have those standards adopted, then becomes the next big key piece of this literacy work. And that is, how are we intentional about designing professional learning and certainly the instructional supports that will inform, that will guide, that will provide the necessary tools for our teachers to be in those classrooms, because that's where literacy really happens. You often hear that, students learn to read and adults read to live. And so we have a high calling and a high responsibility to make sure that we get these standards right and that they move our students forward in the next years to come ahead. There's also some other things that we have been working on, a comprehensive approach to looking at literacy in our state. And all of these opportunities are available for our districts. They may not be used in every district, but they're available, and that's because it's very important that our districts know their students, they know their communities, and they're able to use these best practices and these opportunities to accelerate their literacy efforts forward. So one of the things that we've been really involved in the Teaching and Learning Division, and certainly in curriculum and instruction, is providing a multitude of vetted and aligned resources. And what's unique about these resources is, number one, they're aligned to Georgia standards. And number two, they are created and vetted by Georgia educators. And who better to design resources and support than our master teachers that are in the classroom with the guidance of content experts. We also have invested in academic recovery specialists. These are geographically and regionally distributed across our state. These are resource support specialists that can go in and walk hand in hand and work with districts to work on their strategic literacy plans and to move their academic efforts forward. Boost Grants is another partnership that offers great opportunities to many of our students. This provides additional hours of learning through after-school and summer programs. You can see we've logged already over 40,000 hours, and we have another projected 317,000 coming. So that's pretty instrumental in being intentional about learning beyond the traditional classroom day. Georgia Virtual Seats, this is another way that we provide access to students. Last year, we provided an additional 6,500 seats to our rural district, and this is at no cost to those districts and schools. One thing in literacy that is essentially important is ensuring that when we use assessments, that we are formatively using those assessments to help our teachers and help us to identify the exact places where we can go in and provide targeted interventions. Georgia Department of Ed has provided at no cost both Beacon and Kingville, and those are formative assessments that districts can choose to use to help them as they identify literacy issues and then to better strategically plan for what they will do, how they will implement, and how they then move students towards success. And then also we have grant opportunities available. I'll speak a little bit more about the L4GA grant in a minute, but this is a large grant, about $180 million of federal money, and it is a competitive grant, and so has been it has been awarded to several school districts, and that has been a large body of work in the state of Georgia. As I mentioned earlier, and I may have said this, but I just left my district in Decatur County, down in the southwest corner of Bainbridge, Georgia. If you're Bulldog fans, then you know that's where Kirby Smart's from. So we're kind of proud of that. But other than that, it also gives me a unique perspective because I'm a practitioner. And so when I left my district, I left to join the Office of Rural Education and Innovation. And you may know that division was created a little over a year ago. And our charge was to know and to connect and to learn about the real issues in our rural districts. And there's 115 out of the 181 that exist in the state of Georgia. So it should be no surprise to you, and it was no surprise to me, that literacy was something that we could not talk about. So one of the first initiatives in my role in that division that we worked in conjunction with some additional divisions in Georgia Department of Ed was being intentional about providing science-based literacy training to our rural districts. We started in the southwest corner of Georgia, so we have cohorts going on right now in Chattahoochee, Flint, southwest Georgia, Risa, and we've already scaled that out to First District and Pioneer. And those are opportunities for districts to engage in science-based reading that fits their needs and works right alongside their strategic literacy plans. We've also partnered with Graduation Alliance, and these are academic coaches that will reach out and make connections with our students, re-engage them post-pandemic. Some of them, because of break-in service or loss of learning time, may have become disengaged over the challenges that the pandemic season provided many of our families and our students. So these are coaches that are going in and working hand in hand with those families to re-engage their students and make sure they're in school, because we all know if they're not in school, they don't have the opportunity to learn as well as they would if they were sitting in our classrooms. We also know that there are often barriers that sometimes we have to address before we can get down to teaching students to read and write. And so one of the other initiatives through the Office of Rural Education are vision and hearing screenings. These screenings are being provided free of charge, and we started in southwest Georgia. And what I think is most beneficial about these vision and hearing screenings is it's more than just a screening. When we find that students have needs that require further evaluation, we're following up with those students and leading them to referrals. You can see the numbers on the screen, and that referral can lead to the provision of glasses and or hearing aids. And so I think that is a really essential part in ensuring that when our students come to the classroom, they are ready to learn to read and write. Dyslexia, certainly that is a topic that is no stranger to any of us. There's a large emphasis on this, and we continue at Georgia Department of Ed to be focused and intentional about meeting the needs in this area. Several things that are happening right now. We have a dyslexia pilot going on with districts that are engaged in the dyslexia work. You know, we have a state board rule that is provided to guide districts and schools. We have also hired a statewide dyslexia coordinator, and she is leading fabulous work with the State Dyslexia Task Force. I was just in a meeting with that group last Friday. That group is a large group that is comprised of dyslexia experts, advocates, and educators. And certainly their work is focused on how do we meet the needs and how do we make sure that we are providing the right supports and instructional access so that our students who are challenged with dyslexia issues have every access that they need to thriving in the classroom. I mentioned earlier the L4GA grant. I love this heat map because it shows you that this grant is distributed across the state of Georgia. It's not localized to one area. As I mentioned earlier, it's one of the largest grants of its kind, over $180 million that was awarded to Georgia. And it is really focused on prioritizing school districts that have a high level of poverty, students reading below grade level, and struggling schools. But what's unique about this grant is it's not just a one-size-fits-all. It's very intentional about the community, having community partnerships and using connections within the community to build a infrastructure and to transition their district or their schools into a literacy program that addresses the needs of the students in each community. You can see that there's about 66 school districts, 505 schools, and Birth to 5 programs. And that Birth to 5 program area of focus is very, very important because oftentimes what we find is when our students enter school, they already come with disadvantages. So the more we can do at that Birth to 5 age to get students ready so that when they come to us in pre-K or kindergarten or first grade, because in Georgia, a student's not required to be in school until age 6, so that could mean a student student's first experience in the classroom might be at first grade. And I don't know about you, but if you have children that have been through kindergarten or grandchildren lately who have experienced kindergarten students are pretty smart. They're learning a lot of the things that I was learning in first grade now in kindergarten and pre-K. So that birth to 5 is super, super important. This is just a little more information about L4GA. I will tell you that as we look at that data and look at how that grant is impacting and the work from that grant is impacting our state, we are seeing promising results that students who are in schools and engaged in these schools are performing and making gains. And I would say with literacy, it's all about making incremental, systematic gains. It's not a sprint. It's definitely a marathon. So let's look at our some data that we use. Lexile Measure is one of the consistent data measures that we use not only in our state but across 50 states. Our state assessment does use this metrics to determine whether or not a student is reading at or above grade level. And so Lexiles are measured by a grade band, and so if a student is reading within that grade band, then we would give them a designation of a reading status of at or above grade level. So this is a portion of data that I'll show you. You can certainly look at 2019, which was pre-pandemic, and then you can certainly look at 2022. We all know why there was a gap in 2020. And so while we will say that we are encouraged, and we would say that we are definitely rebounding and making opportunities to close those gaps, we still would be remiss to just say we all want to be where we were pre-pandemic, and we also want to continue to consistently move the success of our students forward. You will see this is a map that shows the colored dots are cohorts, so it will show you where students start with us in third grade, and you will notice as the years progress, our students that stay with us in the K-12 continuum, you will see that as they move toward the end of their career with us, even though they may have started at a lower end of that stretch span, they are moving to the upper end of those demand limits. Another way to represent this data is that our students who are taking the ACT and the SAT, they are actually outscoring the national average in the reading section on ACT and on the reading and writing section of the ACT and the reading and writing section of the ACT. And that is something that Georgia has been really proud of, to have that consistent gains, especially over the last couple of years. So I think that's promising data for us as we look at literacy and how we measure it and how we make decisions about, where do we go? What do we do next? We can all agree that literacy is an issue that is in the forefront. It should ground everything that we do. And so I would be remiss not to leave you with a couple of ideas or opportunities or suggestions for how we can partner, and certainly things that we are looking at as a department, areas that we are focused on in the Department of Teaching and Learning. But certainly we need to focus on early grade readiness. How do we make sure that when students come to us that they are ready to learn? And how do we increase access to pre-K and kindergarten? Early grades focus. I'm an early childhood teacher by nature. I spent a couple of years in kindergarten myself, but I will tell you that every good teacher knows that a great paraprofessional is worth their weight in gold and can be one of the single most instrumental pieces in being able to really devise a strategic plan to meet students where they are. I don't know if you've been in a classroom lately, but if you have 21 kids in a classroom, there are 21 different personalized approaches to helping that student learn. So funding paraprofessionals in first grade and second grade, it actually allows schools, it allows classrooms to be very personalized, to be very intentional, to be able to apply interventions and strategic approaches to help a student learn, meet them where they are, and take them to where they deserve to be. Another thing is teacher supports. Being able to know what to do when the program doesn't work is very important. So investing in our teachers and being sure that they have the tools and the resources they need to make the decisions in the moment to meet the needs of our diverse learners is extremely important. So continuing to find ways to work with our traditional and our non-traditional approaches to teachers, teacher preparations come in our room, that is essentially important. And we have a lot of teachers in our classroom right now that are not going going through traditional college preparatory programs. So they may or may not be getting college classes in methodology, in the science of reading, or literacy, or structured approaches to literacy, or evidence-based. So that's something that we need to continually focus on. And so that leads you to the last point is none of us would argue that a dedicated focus to supporting literacy efforts is essential, and then being able to walk hand in hand with our schools and our districts as we serve them and help them to determine how we can best partner with them to help them increase their literacy efforts. So again, I hope that's given you a high-level overview of the comprehensive approach that the department has as we focus on literacy. It's also given you a little insight into some of the areas that we are thinking about and how we can actually continue to grow our learners for tomorrow. So I appreciate your time, and I'm open to questions if I can give you any more details on anything I shared with you today.
April, hold on 1 second there. First of all, perfect timing, by the way.
Good.
We've been
Good,
watching
because
the
I
watch
practiced
up
several
here.
times and I did not make it under 20
that
minutes.
was a
so
three-pointer from way behind the line, so good job.
I
Thank
should have
you.
warned y'all I'm from South Georgia, right? So I talk fast and loud when I get going. So
Yeah, you did great. Thank you for the effort and what the department is doing for making literacy important. I think everybody on this committee knows the value it is for our students to be able to read on grade level, and the importance of writing also that you brought out early. I have one question, and then I'll turn it over to a few of the questions from the committee. SAT, ACT above national average, you're saying there on the reading portions of that. Can you tell me, has COVID had an impact on the number of students in the state of Georgia taking the ACT and SAT? And it might not be a fair question to you with that, though.
I can answer that.
All right,
Pritchard,
Carrie?
with
Yes,
the Department of Education. There's been a small dip, but we still have one of the highest percentages in the nation of students participating. And I think we're hovering right around that 60% spot right now. So yes, there was a dip. In 2019, we had 71% of our students taking the SAT.
Great. Thank you, Carrie. All right, I'll turn it
I
over.
do have to add, though, even though we had a small dip, we are still well above the national average in terms of the number of students who actually take the SAT, ACT. So we have a larger percentage than most states in the nation that are doing that,
Yep.
which is important to note because we're still beating the national average there.
Great. Thank you. And I'm going to turn over to some questions. I'm just going to call you by number and by what order I saw it. There's so many of you pushed your button here, representatives, and thank you for your question. Number 11.
Thank you, Chair. I just have two questions, if I may. The first one is for the L4GA grants going to low-performing schools. I know the map was really small, but it looked like Fulton County was not in that area. And so I'm just looking at some data from Atlanta Public Schools, which is in Fulton County. You know, total scores for, let's just say the PSAT, the highest score is 1520. And so some of my schools, the scores are in the 600s. And when you're looking at 11th grade readiness in Atlanta Public Schools, when it comes to meeting or not meeting benchmarks, we're looking at several schools in the high 80s to even some at 98% not meeting benchmarks. And so if it's that bad, why would they not be in this L4GA grant area?
So the L4GA grant is an application competitive process. So it is a choice for districts and or schools to apply for that grant. So I couldn't speak specifically, and I can get back to you as far as why those specific schools are not included, but I would want to point out that they would have to apply to be considered to receive that grant.
Okay, so they may not
they
have
may not.
applied. Thank you.
Number 25.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Two questions. One, if we get a copy of the PowerPoint, that'd be great. And second would be regarding your opportunities, do you have specific cost or plans for some of those opportunities you talked about? One of the things I was most interested in was the pre-K factor. As a former elementary principal, one of the things we saw was the importance of pre-K. And I applaud the training our teachers had and the difference it made of having a student, especially in a lower socioeconomic area, go through pre-K. They just made them more prepared for kindergarten and beyond. And so is there a specific plan to how to add those positions and where to add them? And is it, you talking about fully implemented statewide? Kind of I didn't know if you had specific goals in mind, because opportunities are general. Really for everything to happen, really got to have a cost associated with it and what the overall plan is.
Right. Do you want to actually answer? Oh, go ahead. So we will get back to you with more of a definite amount of that. We would certainly need to talk with the Office of Pre-K, because as you know, that is funded differently than our FTE funded K through 12. So we will get with DeKalb and get back with some more specific ranges of numbers for you guys to look at.
Okay, thank you. And I guess are there future opportunities to increase that for systems that want to? That's part of it too, I guess, as you explore that, if you can find that out. Yeah.
We will do that.
Thank you, Representative. Number 18.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, thank you for the presentation, and I'm really excited to hear that we're focusing on literacy and early education, because we know that's a priority for Georgia. So the two, it was kind of two asks that I saw in here. One was funding the paraprofessionals and dedicated funding for literacy efforts. Do you have an amount that will be needed to sufficiently fund the paraprofessionals, and what would it cost for a dedicated funding for the literacy efforts in order for Georgia to meet its standards of reading on grade level?
Right. Again, we'll get back to you with specific numbers and really give you some guidelines and some information in increments about what that might look like to fully fund or to partially fund, to give you some things to consider. Thank
We're
you.
giving you plenty of homework. I think
I like
we'll
homework.
take one off your plate. Courtney George here is sharing members the PowerPoint with you, I believe, as quickly as she can. So that'll come off your plate there.
That's okay.
Boy, remember we've got at least 4 other folks. Let's do this quickly if we can. Number 10.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for being here in presentation, and I'm excited that we have a practitioner in this role. So hats off to you when you were in the classroom. I know the sacrifice. I sleep with a teacher every single night, and it's the same one for Smart Alex in the room. It's my high school sweetheart, and she's in her 21st year of education. So I want to talk about 3 things. One, formative assessments, Beacon and Keenville. You said it's optional. I'd like, at a future date, if you can provide it, the number of systems that are not doing that. Why? Is it because they've got their own assessments because they're a large system and they're self-funding, or they don't know about it, or there's other dynamics that are preventing them, or they're making a decision not to use those assessments? And if so, are they not doing any assessments, or what are the assessments that they are using? Second, I saw the 50,000 students that you're serving through coaches. What's the number of coaches that is currently?
So
Do you know?
So that Grad Alliance is a partnership with, and that's what's the right word for me to, that's a partner that we have, and so they have academic coaches, and that number varies depending on how many students are engaged at that time, and there are different levels of support that those academic coaches provide. They may come in and make phone calls, they may make home visits, so I can get you probably a few
That's
more
fine.
specific numbers, but that number will ebb and flow depending on the amount of focus or support or intensity that a family needs with their student.
All right. And then last is around the screeners that you mentioned relating to dyslexia. Mm-hmm. So I have a deep interest in kind of 2 of the things that you've recommended. One is understanding the screening process that we currently have deployed in the state. Are we limited to only doing dyslexia, or could we enrich that process to allow them to do other types of screening, especially in that onboarding pre-K student that's in a public school setting, with partnering with DeKalb, and number 2, with kindergarten G-Kids, et cetera, doing spot checks and understanding the frequency to that, and can we somehow, expand that to beyond just dyslexia, to other screening types? So that's kind of, is that something that's doable, or what are your
I would say that our
thoughts?
formative assessments, that is probably a dual role that formative assessments play. So when we talk about dyslexia, we're talking about specific screeners that are focused on a student who might be experiencing challenges from dyslexia. But our formative assessments work as screeners all through the K-12 process, and those are used by districts to identify. Sometimes they're Keenville or Beacon, and sometimes they are district-selected tools that accompany some program or their approach to literacy. So I would say there are a myriad number of types of screeners that are being used formatively in districts. But there's always opportunities to look for how we make that better, how we're more intentional. And I would say that's our biggest challenge as we talk about literacy is, there are lots of opportunities, there are lots of avenues, there are lots of ways that we can go about doing that, but there's also an intentionality and a purposefulness in making sure that we're selecting the right items to help us, and that we're also staying the course to make sure that our students, at the end of the day, get the best part of our efforts.
So in the last, with this, Chairman, if you don't mind, this is something I'm very passionate about. I have a third grader. My wife and I have a third grade daughter. So we are in that stage of parenting to think through this. Okay, we're going to be having a pretty big test coming up for her, an assessment. I know that the structure of that test, the format, is nothing compared to what she is actually doing in the learning process, lap reading, sitting on the couch, doing homework, doing drills, about all the things that we do. The test scenario is automated. It looks nothing like the experience of learning. And there's research that there are people that say, nope, they can do this, but they're also spending time doing computer, but they're not learning how to do their phonics through a computer. They're doing it through other methods. So I'm just curious, is that the best way to fully assess the actual effectiveness of our reading program? That's one assessment that we're using. Third grade, they end up in fourth before we really start saying that 36% that's not reading at grade level. What if we had an assessment that was geared to the exact method in which they're learning how to read? Is that going to be a better augmented understanding? So that's a future conversation I hope we can have. But I'll tell you, that's what parents talk to me about, and I'm in it too. And so now I've been enlightened to that reality that our daughter will face this spring. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
We cut your microphone off. Representative Wade. Ladies, let me ask a question of the DOE. Can you stay after the meeting so that you could answer some questions that we're not going to be able to get to today?
Absolutely.
Thank you. We have quite a few, and I understand the importance of this, so I'm not downplaying your questions that you have. Know that. If you would, carry your question, members, to them. This is a very important topic that we address as quickly as possible in session, and while we're down here, literacy. Let's do all we can, and thank you two for the effort and the knowledge that you are spreading throughout this state. So thank you very much. Let me keep going. Members, if you would, I'm going to clear you there off asking questions, and I apologize again. Let's jump to another group that I have a lot of respect for, and they do a good job of conveying their data that they're able to produce for us. And we receive these, members, at our desk, and you have one there before you, which is going to be the top 10 issues in education. You see here, it is run by somebody who has a tremendous amount of knowledge on what is going on in education. We've asked them to come present to us. It's a Georgia Partnership for Excellence in Education. With us today, we have Dr. Dana Rickman and Matt Smith. Dana, excuse me. Dr. Rickman is the president. Matt is the director of policy and research. Dr. Rickman, we're going to turn the floor over, and thank you for coming.
Thank you, and thank you very much for inviting us to speak today and to share some of our information with you. We've also distributed, there's a white folder on your table that has copies of the top 10, but also mercifully one-page summaries of each of the issue, which I know many of you just love to read thick books in your spare time, but just in case you don't, there are some summaries there and some other information that we thought may be useful to you. But good afternoon, and thank you again for inviting us to speak. Very briefly, I think most of you are aware of the Georgia Partnership, but just in case you're not, we are a nonprofit advocacy organization that was founded in 1992 by the Georgia Chamber of Commerce and the Georgia Economic Developers Association. Back in 92, which is now, for those of you like me, lost in time, was more than 30 years ago, the business community in Georgia did not feel that the public education system was producing the quality of workforce that they wanted, from which they could draw their employees, but they did not know how to engage in that process of partnering with schools and advocating for reforms and things of that nature. So we were created to be that voice, to be that connective tissue between business and economic development and the education system. And so I like to tell that story before I speak so everyone understands that I believe there are many reasons for a strong public education system, but as an organization, we come at it through the lens of workforce development and economic development. And so we look at state policies and local regional engagement, strategic planning, from early learning all the way through post-secondary and adult education, with the theory that an investment in education is a powerful economic development tool, probably the most powerful economic development tool that we have. And so trying to make those connections. And so you'll see all of that in the work that we do. And so this is our 19th edition of our Top 10 Issues to Watch. We publish it every year. It comes out right before session starts in January. And I have this year's author with me, Matt Smith. So as we have questions, I'm going to tell you everything I know. And then for questions, Matt's going to pop up and be brilliant for you. And so real briefly, we're not going to do 10 minutes on each issue, I promise. But there's always that joke. We'll just spend 5 minutes on each issue and then watch people do the math. But before I dive in, I want to back up for just a short second. For those of you who are familiar with the Top 10, last year's Issues to Watch, we offered up sort of a common vision for excellence. And we, as an organization, we really recommended that state policymakers, but along with education leaders, leaders in the business sector, leaders at the state and local level, really unite behind what we call a North Star goal. And for us, that North Star goal would be within the next 10 years, by 2033, 65% of our adult population will have obtained a post-secondary credential of value. And to be clear, what I mean post-secondary credential, I'm not talking about strictly 4-year degrees, but some sort of credential beyond high school, whether that be a certificate, a diploma, something like that, because our economic growth, the predictions of where we're growing as a state, requires that level of educated workforce. So for us to keep growing economically and to raise our populations out of poverty, that's what's required. So we've been working on creating a sort of a state policy framework that would get us there within the next 10 years. And so the current top 10 that you have be organized just slightly differently than what you're used to, where we've broken around this framework. The issues are laid out in 3 main areas. The first one is called investing in big bets, which are large-scale initiatives to reconfigure state structures and systems and investments to make them more responsive, sort of individual and community needs. The second group looks at investing in school and community leaders, practical and ground-level solutions that are happening out across the state, but are addressing issues that really state systems and state policies can't address. So how can we raise up what's going on and invest what's going on in local? And then finally, the third area would be investing and spreading and scaling, local solutions. Again, there's a lot that's happening in Georgia, and so how do we scale up and reduce barriers to spread? And so real briefly, these are the 10, and I just want to touch on them quickly, and then we can have any questions about them. The first one is called EdQuest Georgia Framework, and that was the framework I was referencing a few minutes ago. It sets the stage for a 10-year plan with this ambitious goal of 65% of Georgia adults having earned a post-secondary credential. Throughout this past year, we worked with we led the EdQuest Georgia Coalition. Many of the members are here, which is about 40-plus state agency and advocacy organizations and whatnot, really revising the original EdQuest plan that came out in 2017 that served as a model for education reform in Georgia. It really identifies opportunities to address some systematic opportunities in Georgia across 7 core policy areas that work in consort with each other. And so it gives suggestions around foundations for early learning, quality teaching, quality leadership, supported learning environments, advanced instructional systems, clear pathways to post-secondary success, and adequate and equitable funding. Whoa. Pardon me. I forgot it was already up there and I didn't have to forward it. Issues 2 through 4, those next 3 issues really focus on that first section of big bets. Issue 2, around early learning supports, really focuses on a comprehensive, or the recommendation around a comprehensive early childhood development plan that really unifies services and sectors to support healthy education, health, family, and community services to make sure that all children are ready to learn when they hit kindergarten, and then reading to learn by the time they hit 3rd grade. And so a much more comprehensive strategy. Issue 3, looking at instructional strategies, we've done a really great job in getting our high school graduation rate up past 80%, which is to be applauded, especially as we've maintained high graduation standards. But we know that once students get into post-secondary, there's a lot of gaps and there's a lot of students falling out of that. And so this has a couple of recommendations around how to close that sort of readiness for post-secondary gap, around creating readiness milestones aligned to our standards throughout high school, individualized instruction, but really most importantly around this issue is the role of counselors and what historically has been seen as guidance counselors, whose job it is to provide guidance for post-secondary options, but many counselors in Georgia now are also taking on the role as we think about counselors for socio-emotional work with the mental health hit. And so those are really 2 separate jobs. And so as a state, we need to think about separating out those jobs and funding them appropriately at appropriate ratios. Issue 4, post-secondary promise, rethinking the pathway to economic prosperity. How do we get more people completing that post-secondary credential? 3 main recommendations here. We still need a comprehensive statewide need-based financial aid program. We made great progress last session around the last mile completion grants, but we still need a statewide needs-based aid program. We need to expand and deepen incentives for working adults to enroll in short-term programs and earn post-secondary credentials. We have districts in Georgia, or counties in Georgia, where about 45% of the adult population does not have anything beyond high school. And these areas of Georgia have been disinvested from economic development because the workforce is not there. There's also an adult literacy problem. And so I urge you that when you think about education, please don't forget the adults. There's too many in Georgia that we need to bring back into the, to be involved in our economy. And finally, we need to really enhance credit articulation agreements generally. TCSG and USG have been working on this and getting their transferability across credits better, but we still need to strengthen that, especially in areas that are tied to our most high-need areas. The next 3 really focus that second section on investments in school and community leaders. The way we think about leaders is pretty inclusive, not just educators, of course, but also students, parents, and other civic and community leaders that are invested in our schools. And so the first one in that area is issue 5, educator burnout. Really looks at the underlying causes of teacher burnout. Salary is always one that people point to, and Georgia has made great strides in trying to address the teacher salary situation, but as most of you probably know, it's so much more than that. Poor working conditions, inadequate preparation, lack of professional growth. And so we really need to look at how we support teacher leaders in particular, prioritizing professional growth, and also the personal well-being of teachers and educators in the building. That's a huge issue that needs to be considered. School safety, I know, is on everybody's mind of late and is a priority. And so in this issue, we really demonstrate the value of school culture and climate and wraparound services as a strategy to help mitigate some of the school safety issues that we've had. So those strategies in combination with some of the more sort of tactical hardening the target kind of efforts that we've been talking about, these need to be done in tandem. Issue 7, community engagement, redefining that relationship. I think for those of us who had children in public schools over the past couple of years, we feel that we are engaged in our students' learning like never before. And I think a lot of teachers and principals got what they wished for and have a bunch of engaged parents now, which is wonderful. But I think if it's not done properly, we end up with situations like some hostile district board meetings and things like that that are frankly not conducive to the best interest of the kids. And so we really want to look at a model to how do we get this energy of engagement, and how do we empower our principals and district leaders to help parents and community members engage in a positive, effective way, for everybody to come together and get the goals that they want. Finally, the last three issues are around the spreading and scaling of local best practices and really spotlighting the need to integrate these practices into existing state strategies. The first is out-of-school learning experiences. You heard in the presentation earlier about the BOOST grant. One of the things we recommend is state leaders using existing assets to support an out-of-school framework that provides predictable and recurring state investments for after-school and summer learning. Through the BOOST grant, GSAM, which is the Georgia Statewide After School Network, they're building out this framework now. And so we need to think about when that, because the BOOST grant is tied to the federal CARES relief, ARPA, ESSER funds, whatever you want to call it. When that money goes away, how do we sustain that framework and that reliability for parents and students and families for that after school and out of school time opportunities? Chapter 9, local leadership. We talk about lessons from local communities that are really doing a great job developing cross-sector solutions to some of our most vexing challenges, and we focus on two community-centered approaches where state systems and structures can really invest and support local leaders. The first is a multi-generational approach. Also, you may have heard it called 2Gen approach. And there's some examples where DECAL and TCSG are working together a lot in this area with really good results. And the second, there's a lot of regional work and local work being done around joint education, economic, and workforce development initiatives, where they sort of combine these strategies to make sure that the K-12 systems, if they have college and career academies, for example, or their career pipelines, that they are feeding directly into the local technical college and the local businesses, and so they're sort of growing their own workforce kind of things. There's some examples across Georgia of that work being done very well. And finally, for those of you who know me, you know I love talking about funding and accountability, so I couldn't leave it out. But I really see them as two sides of the same coin. Really, principally, how do we reform these two systems to generate the changes that we hope to see by 2033, that frankly we need to see by 2033? We need to fully understand how local districts are utilizing their federal pandemic relief dollars, thoughtfully incorporating those learnings into updating the current QBE formula. One of the things that we've put in your folders, the partnership is also currently undergoing a CARES impact study, and we have some few early results about what's being done with the CARES money in local districts. You can see those findings in your report. And then finally, around accountability, state leaders really need to draft an accountability framework that I think includes multiple measures of school quality and embeds structures and supports for performance-based feedback and around school improvement. We need a model that is supportive of schools and really fosters innovation. It really fosters collaboration. It really fosters, the reason I think funding and accountability go together is it's not a matter of throwing more money at the system or throwing more money at a district or a school. It's a matter of putting the money where it's needed the most and where you get your most leverage. And a good accountability system can help you identify those points. And so we need to be looking at accountability system as a hammer that would help build up a house and not as a hammer that's used to, club somebody over the head with it. And so that's my story. I hope I came in the right amount of time, and I'm happy to field any questions for Matt or any complaints for Matt.
I don't want to get onto the DOE here or downplay y'all, but she beat you by a minute now. So we're happy, Dr. Rickman. You did very good with your timing too. But
next time, I'll get to that.
Excellent information. I'll turn it over very quickly to questions here. And Matt, also thank you for being here and communicating, and job well done with this book and expanding our minds. Again, as I see them, number 11, we'll go to you. Representative.
Thank you, Chair. This is one of my favorite committees, so sorry about being so anxious to press my button. My question is, for number 10, do you have a template or a model framework for us to work with?
For which, the funding or accountability or both?
The accountability.
You have some ideas on that.
Yes, I do. And our partners at the Georgia Department as well. They, about 18 months ago, came out with a Rethinking School Reopening, and one of the key recommendations was around creating an accountability system where we could have really centralize our state priorities and our workforce priorities, but also be clear that there is a lot of innovation going on and that we would think about locally determined measures as well. This is a model that would be unlike ones that we see in most other states, but it's one that would leverage what Dr. Rickman was talking about in terms of creating that ability to improve schools, not just a data point without any kind of context, but would allow educators and school leaders to actually be able to leverage school improvement strategies.
Thank you. Can you provide that to the framework to us? Thank you.
All right. Who's 13? There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for always being helpful even before I got on the committee. So you've been great over the years. Question on number 3, the secondary, closing that gap. Because we have so many opportunities for dual enrollment, AP, a lot of times students come into college as a sophomore, so they don't have that kind of glide in and get the experience of taking on additional classes because they're coming out of, maybe a block schedule where they don't have as many classes. Is it a positive or a negative, or do we know the impact of not your super high achieving student, but for an average student that comes in with a couple of classes, comes in as a sophomore, does that help or hurt them as far as their long-term success?
I would say the data answer for your question, I don't know. I haven't looked at a research study on that. I would say anecdotally, from what I understand, is that it does help toward completion, but it's like everything else, that alone is not going to do it. And so USG in particular, and you hear the stories from Georgia State, that regardless of what they come in with, we need much more aggressive advising and counseling on persistence through. And so you typically think of that as like a first-gen college student, navigating the system and stuff, but you bring up a great point of someone who comes in with a atypical, what does this look like? What does this mean for my college? And so I think along with more aggressive counseling for students when they're in school, that these things actually do help get them through quicker and certainly with less expense if they have the right guidance and counseling while they're in school making the right appropriate choices. So it's a both and.
Okay, just real quick follow-up if you don't mind. So I would be interested in that data because I do hear from parents that their child comes into college as a sophomore and they're just kind of, I think the classes are good, the base is good. It's just that there's that concern that they are now struggling and maybe end up falling out because they are at a higher level than they probably should be because college is different than high school. So I would be curious if we could get that data somehow.
That's interesting. We'll look for that.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. I'm going to allow one more question, and we'll need to go on. So if y'all would stay at the podium just a second. Vice Chair Hilton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your time, Madam Chair. It's 2023.
Can I get a volunteer for Vice Chair?
Yeah, I know. I just lost my Vice Chair. I'll keep my question real quick then. Issues number 5, 6, and 7, I think blend together in some respect. That's teacher loss, burnout, school safety, and community engagement. We're seeing some issues in our county and maybe the metro region of some pretty just horrific incidents in the classroom of violence against teachers. Do you have any data or insights into that issue? I know it's a complex one, and how we might be able to think about that or address that. I know it's a combination of mental health, culture, environment, a whole lot of things. So any thoughts or comments on that?
We can speak to the data piece in terms of school discipline incidents and whatnot. The Georgia Department of Ed does collect that data through a student and school climate survey, and so we can provide you with that information.
Great, thank you. As I said, we'll move on. If y'all happen to hang around, we do have other questions, and if you have time, I'd love the members to step up to you and get their questions answered. Thank y'all again, and thank you for the appropriate use of the time there. We have our next group coming in, which I have seen it not only in the chamber over the years, but in the community, the misunderstanding of the different charters that we have. So what we've done is we have asked the State Charter School Commission to come speak to us, and their executive director, Lauren Holcomb. Lauren, thank you for what you do, first of all. I've heard you speak many times, but I also would appreciate that you come and educate us a little bit on the different charters and what charter schools and charter systems and on and on and on, so that this group, as we talk in the chamber, we can all be on the same page of what we're talking about.
You said chamber, and I was like, maybe it's not me, maybe the chamber's here to present. So I sat back down real fast, but thank y'all for letting me be here. I'm Lauren Holcomb. I'm the executive director of the State Charter Schools Commission. I've gotten to know Chairman Irwin over the last few months. He's been a wonderful partner, just asking questions and learning and letting us sort of weigh in on some stuff. So I appreciate so much the partnership with you and getting to know some old faces and new faces again, and Vice Chairman Hilton for inviting us to be here. So I've got my timer going. I'm gonna beat everybody else on time here. So I'm gonna quickly go through my presentation, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that y'all have. But so we were invited to sort of speak about charter schools in Georgia. I know there can be a lot of misconceptions about charter schools. Well, so I'll have this captive audience. I'm gonna try to dispel some myths and just share all the great things that charters are doing. So we'll start with the very beginning. What the heck is a charter school? Let's start there. So we've got some actual charter school students that I'm going to be showing y'all throughout the presentation, and these are students from Drew Charter School, which I think we have a representative of Drew Charter School representing their district here today. So I thought you would enjoy seeing those students. So I hope y'all can see this. I didn't realize how small that was, but we'll get you the presentation. Sort of high level, a charter school is a form of public school choice. So you probably all hear that term, school choice, and there's lots of different types of school choice. So there can be private school choice, sort of we talk about tuition subsidies or vouchers or ESAs around private school choice. Charter schools are a form of public school choice. So if I leave you with nothing else today, I hope everyone knows that a charter school is a public school, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But that is sort of first and foremost for all of us charter supporters. We want to make sure that everyone understands that. Charter schools empower families and students with options. So this gives families an option outside of the district school that they're zoned to attend, which oftentimes are wonderful schools, but sometimes that school doesn't work for their child and they would like to have another option. So this gives families another option in case they have a different type of need or want to just see a different educational program for their child. And I'm going through that right now. I have a kindergarten student, so I'm learning about all the different types of schools that are available. And you know, sometimes the school you thought that you moved into that district, you had the resources to move into a district and you thought that was going to be the right school for your child. Your child might have different needs, and so a charter school is just another choice for you. Charter schools use flexibility to provide innovative educational programs. So sort of at its core, we like to talk about the charter bargain. So all charter schools are subject to this charter bargain that we talk about, which is flexibility is given to them in exchange for increased accountability. So a charter school, once it gets started, they'll submit a petition to propose we're going to do things differently than what's been traditionally done in our area. So we're going to waive certain laws. We might want to offer a certain program. And in exchange for that, the other part of that bargain that goes hand in hand is that there's increased accountability. And I'll get more into that in a second. Checking my time here. I've only got 12 minutes left. Okay. A charter school is a public school, again, that's open to all students, tuition free, non-sectarian, overseen by a nonprofit governing board. This is often another myth that we hear about charter schools, is that they're privately run or private schools. Every charter school in Georgia, this is a law, they all have a nonprofit governing board that's actually the holder of that charter contract. So charter schools can contract with private vendors just like any other school can, but they're all nonprofit governing boards that are holding that contract. It's not a for-profit entity. Charter schools operate via charter agreements. Again, so a charter, when you hear that word charter, what that really means is just a contract. It's a flexibility contract. We have different types of flexibility contracts in Georgia. So, Chairman Irwin, you referenced charter systems. That's sort of another type of flexibility contract that school districts can have. Our office, the State Charter Schools Commission, oversees only charter schools, but We hear a lot about charter systems. We work closely with the Charter System Foundation. That's actually overseen by DOE. And there's different types of charter schools in Georgia, which I'll get to in a second. And that charter agreement, which is that contract, is a contract that's held between a charter school and their authorizer. So hang on to that word, authorizer, because y'all might be saying, what the heck is an authorizer? And I'm going to get to that too. And then charter schools that fail to meet their contract terms are subject to closure. So that's a really important note about charter schools, and something that makes them very different than traditional schools is charter schools live and die by these contract terms that are traditionally 5-year contract terms. At the end of their term, they have to apply for renewal. And if their authorizer discovers they're not doing good things for students, they're not giving kids a better opportunity, then they're subject to closure. They're not just going to exist for perpetuity. Okay, so who attends charter schools here in Georgia? This is results from the 21-22 school year. So we get a new annual report every year. Our office oversees what we call state charter schools, and this is encompassing both state charter schools and local charter schools. So we've got 90 charter schools that were operating last year in the state of Georgia with 60,000 students. There are charter schools all over the state. There's different kinds, and I'll touch on that in a second. But in terms of student demographics, what we see is typically charter schools are serving a larger number of Black or African American students than sort of the state average of Black students in the state. A lower proportion of white students than traditional district schools, a slightly lower proportion of Hispanic students, and sort of on par with Asian and multiracial students. Another important note here is that we've got 14,000 students as of last year that are on waiting lists to get into charter schools. So charter schools are open to all students, but it's going to depend on how much space is available in a school. So, we hear sometimes about, charter schools screen or cherry pick for the best students. That is false. Charter schools are not allowed to, say, have admissions requirements or say, you tested really high, so we're going to allow you to enter this school, but you are a low achieving student, you can't enter this school. Everybody has an equal shot to get into a charter school. What we hear about sometimes is they're constrained by the space that they have within a facility and how many students they can serve. And when a charter school wants to enroll more students in their space, then they go into a lottery. And everyone in that lottery has an equal chance of getting into the school. So you can see this number continues to grow every year. Right now, the current number is about 14,000 students that are on those waiting lists for a spot to get into a school. So the types of charter schools in Georgia, there are all different types of schools. This is, they use that flexibility to provide something that's different. Georgia is actually known nationwide for the diverse portfolio of schools that we have, and for our schools being homegrown, community-based schools. So that's something that's really a feather in our cap in Georgia and not something that you see everywhere. And that means basically schools were built from the ground up. So it wasn't some kind of operator that we hear about sometimes with these large networks that come in and want to start a school. These are really homegrown from parents and families in a community saying, we would like another option. We're going to design something that's an independent homegrown school. So we've got 2 or 3 statewide virtual schools now. So one thing that I think is interesting for y'all to know is that students from every single school district in the state attend a charter school through one of those virtual schools. So you may not have a brick and mortar charter school in your district, but you absolutely have at least one student and one family in your district that's attending one of the virtual schools. There are project-based learning schools, STEM and STEAM schools, classical learning, language immersion. We have some really innovative language immersion schools in Georgia that are offering Mandarin, Japanese, all kinds of just really innovative language programs. This is just a sampling. There are so many really cool programs going on in charter schools around the state. Doing a time check here. Okay, 7 minutes. How do charter schools perform? This is what we really care about, right? Because charter schools are supposed to be getting better outcomes for students. That's part of the charter bargain, is that extra accountability. So I'm going to go through a couple studies here. I'll go through them quickly just because we're running short on time. But there were 2 really, really large national studies of charter school performance. Just every charter school in the country that was operating at these times were included. 2013 and 2015, this was a study out of Credo, which you probably all heard of. It's a very reputable research organization out of Stanford University. And they found that on average, charter schools around the nation are outperforming their district-run peers in reading, district-run school peers in reading, adding an average of 7 days of learning per year. That was the 2013 study. The 2015 study really focused more on urban charter schools, and they found even more impressive results, which showed that charter school students gained an additional 40 days of learning in math per year and an additional 28 days of reading compared to their district school peers. And those results were even more pronounced for minority school students from low-income backgrounds, and the results increased the longer that a student was enrolled in a charter school. For people who know a lot about charter schools, and especially the ones that we have in Georgia, this isn't super surprising because a lot of times, or that last note about urban-run schools is not surprising because we see a lot of schools that intentionally are coming in to locate in urban areas where they want to serve typically underserved or historically underserved populations. Well, that's national. Y'all probably don't care so much about national. You probably care a lot more about what is actually happening in Georgia, so I'm going to talk about that too. In the 21-22 school year, and you know we don't have the best data for the last couple years, unfortunately, but I'm going to give you what we got. 21-22 school year, 87% of state charter schools, which are the schools under the commission, outperformed their comparison districts on either student proficiency or growth measures. And then the 22 NAEP, which y'all have heard of, I'm sure, the nation's report card results. Those are probably the best results that we have at this point. Georgia Charter School fourth grade students outperformed their traditional school peers by 8 points in math and 14 points in reading. Eighth grade students received a math score that was 4 points above traditional students and 8 points higher in reading. And then most prominently, black charter school students scored higher than their traditional black peers in fourth grade math by 22 points, fourth grade reading 23 points, eighth grade math 11 points, and eighth grade reading 10 points. And this is a highlight. The NAEP results, which I'm sure you all know, showed historic declines in reading and math. This is post-pandemic results, so we could really see what the impact of the pandemic had been on kids. We were, kind of fortunate in Georgia that Georgia overall stayed pretty stable, but this is a highlight from NAEP that we can see that charter school students made gains more than their traditional district peers, which is encouraging given sort of none of us are happy with where we are after seeing these NAEP results and after the pandemic. Okay, I'm going to go real fast through how charter schools are held accountable because this is the work that we do. I think it's really important for policymakers to understand this. Charter schools are held accountable by their authorizers. So this is me circling back again to that term about authorizers. The State Charter Schools Commission is one of the authorizers in Georgia. We have two different kinds. And so you'll hear, as I'm sure many of you already know, and if you're new to the committee, you'll see bills about this, and they'll be referencing different types of charter schools based on the type of authorizer that they have. So in Georgia, we have local boards of education can be authorizers, and that's a three-party contract between the local board of education, the state board of education plays a role in that as well, and the charter school. So that's one kind of school. We call those local charter schools. We also have state charter schools, and those are schools that have been approved by the State Charter Schools Commission. And that's my office. The commission can approve schools that have either been denied by a local board of education. So we really want to push schools through that local process first and serve as an appellate agency. The commission, I think I'll get to this in a second, but was established via constitutional referendum. Some of y'all were here and helped work on that bill, so thank you for that. But in 2012, it was actually on the ballot. Voters went and voted and said, we want an additional avenue for charter school authorization, and that created the commission. So we're coming into our 10th year now. And then a high-quality charter school authorizer, I think this is important to note because charter schools can really only be as good as their authorizer or as successful as their authorizer. It's really important that the authorizer is doing their work. And a good authorizer approves high-quality charter petitions. So you only approve petitions that you think are actually going to get students better results. An authorizer is very student-centered. We make every decision based on our kids going to be better off in this school than they would in their traditional district school. They extend autonomy and provide support, so it's not the job of an authorizer at all to tell a school what to do, to tell a charter school how to run their school. We're supposed to review their petition, vet if it's going to be a good option for kids, and then provide support to them. And lastly, that sort of third stool is upholding accountability. And so An authorizer should be looking at, most importantly, academics, but then also operations and finance to ensure, are they holding their legal piece of everything? Are they letting all kids in? Are they ensuring that students' rights are fulfilled? Are they ensuring that teachers' rights are fulfilled? Is it a safe school to be in? And lastly, finances, because the number one reason that charter schools close is financial problems. So it's really important to be looking at those finances every year and ensuring that the school is financially stable. Okay, I'm going to end here, and then I'll take questions. The commission is Georgia's, again, independent statewide charter school authorizer, established in constitutional referendum in 2012. We can only take petitions that have either been denied by a local board or serve a broad geographic attendance zone. So, for example, those 3 statewide virtual schools that I talked about are under the purview of the commission. And we are very student-centered. Again, our mission is to improve public education by authorizing schools that would give students a better educational opportunity. And when I say better, I want to just sort of frame that for y'all, because it doesn't necessarily mean that a school has to be meeting certain proficiency targets or that they all have to be A schools. We look equally at growth, because we think if a student came in, grade levels behind and that school is moving them further than their traditional school would be, we think that's equally important. And lastly, our vision is innovative and superior charter schools, advancing education in every community. And I am done with 4 seconds to go. I didn't beat my colleagues, but I stayed on time.
Lauren,
So.
great presentation. Thank you for the education, not only to these members, but to myself. I'll ask one quick question and move on. 90 charter schools. Do you know how many charter schools we've had to close down? You mentioned about financing in the past. Or have we closed down a charter?
I can tell you the commission has closed 5 or 6 schools over our sort of 10-year history. There's been local charter schools that have closed as well. I can certainly find that number and get it to you. Some schools have closed because they weren't providing students a better educational opportunity. That's always first and foremost on our minds. But, if we can find that a school has not been managing their financial resources well, or they, there's other financial challenges there and they're not going to be successful in that regard. That's nationally, not necessarily in Georgia, but nationally, that's the number one reason that we see a charter school close.
Well, thank you. And just wanted to point that out to the members that the feet are held to the fire there then. And I appreciate that they're meeting their goals that they had set with you for the flexibility. See some questions. We'll jump right in. I believe number 12. You were first, Becky.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you so much. I just wanted to confirm what I heard you hear, what I thought I heard you say at the end. So if a charter school is aiming to form in a community, they first go to the local Board of Education and ask for approval. And if they're serving a certain geographic area, if the local Board of Education says no, then that is it. Is that right?
Not exactly. So
Okay.
What the law says is that for schools that want, or petitioners that want to serve what we call a defined geographic attendance zone,
Yes.
they need to first apply to the local Board of Education.
Mhm.
If the local Board of Education says no, and sometimes they're not interested in the school for different kinds of reasons, then they can apply to us and we can function as an appellate agency in that regard. If they want to serve a very broad geographic attendance zone, such as a statewide virtual school, there's an avenue for them to come straight to us, because obviously it's not feasible for them to be approved by every single school district in the state.
Do you know how many local charter schools are there that
Thank you.
were approved by the state?
Do you mean
that went through you versus their local school Board of Education?
how many have been denied by a local Board of Education?
Yeah,
and then
that
came
went
to
on
us?
to be approved by you all.
A lot. I
Oh,
can't
really?
tell you the exact number, but that is definitely a trend that we're seeing. Is I think sort of a byproduct of the commission being established is we're seeing fewer local approvals and more sort of appealing to the state level. And I can absolutely pull those figures for you. I don't have them off the top of my head, but I think that would be a good trend. Probably
Thank
to
you,
see.
Representative Evans. Vice Chair, I'm trying to figure out what I call you next to me. Number 21.
I'm only asking a question so I can get this right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Lauren, excellent presentation. I'm going to do rapid fire here. Is a charter school a public school?
Yeah, it sure is. Thanks
If
for
my
asking.
charter school is underperforming, can you close it?
We sure can.
If my
and we
local
sure will.
if my local public school is underperforming, can it be closed?
It cannot.
Thank you. Demand is far outstripping supply. What needs to change?
I'm sorry. What was the first part?
Demand is you have 14,000 on a waiting list.
That's right. Mhm.
Far outstripping current supply.
That's right.
Locals need to prove more. Is that the solution?
I would love that. I think that would absolutely help. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, ex-vice chair. No, we'll keep you chair for a little while longer. Number 22.
Thanks for being here today. I didn't even say thank you to the chairman. Thank you. See, now you have me nervous about it. So my question is, when you're talking about the flexibility that's offered through charter school, do teachers have that flexibility as well? Or are they still constrained by some of the requirements that are found in a public school for teachers?
It depends sort of on what you mean by constrained. So, I mean, we do hear that a lot, that charter school teachers feel like they have more freedom to sort of teach. There's an ability to waive certain things. So, like class size can be waived, certification can be waived. There's a myriad of laws that can be waived. I do often hear that teachers feel like they came here and they now have more freedom to teach. But I think it sort of depends on the school and how they've structured their program in a way. I know a lot of teachers in our schools have left their traditional district schools, not because they didn't love the community and love working there, but they just felt like there was a lot of bureaucracy in their traditional districts, and they feel sort of freed up from that in a smaller environment that can be a little bit more nimble.
Do you have a number for average class sizes in a charter school?
I don't. I can get that for you, though. I mean, I think it ranges all over the place.
Thank you.
And depends on sort of the size of the school, like and the grade levels. So sometimes we'll see in the larger virtual schools, they might have larger class sizes in the higher grade levels than they would obviously in the lower grade levels. But that's going to be very different than what a brick and mortar school size would look like.
I'm going to try to get to as many questions as possible. Please ask your most important question first here, number 18.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, ma'am.
So a few years ago, we were in some training somewhere, and there was some conversations about creating some flexibilities inside of the traditional schools, having a model of a charter plus the traditional public school inside of the same building. Are you still hearing some of that? And then my most important question, with the chartered schools, what percentage of teachers are certified?
I wonder if that first part might be related to charter systems. Does that sound maybe right? Because I know sort of the premise of a charter system is that they're devolving more of that school level governance down to the school instead of having governance sort of at the district level.
Literally creating different types of systems inside of it. We were not in Georgia with this training. It was something they were talking about a few years ago.
Okay, I'm not, but I would love to know more about that. And maybe I can find some info for you.
Good.
What percentage of teachers are certified? I don't have that, but I can easily get that. I mean, most of our schools do have certified teachers. It's something that they can waive so that they're not required to hire certified teachers. What we see sometimes is career changers coming in. So somebody who might have some expertise in a field, but they don't necessarily have that teacher certification, and the administration feels like they're certainly qualified to teach this with some support, and they have that flexibility to sort of bring in those professional experts.
Representative, let's go on to number 16. Best question, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm jockeying for a vice chair position.
You should have raised your hand up a minute ago. I look this way.
Well, I'm a freshman, so I'm trying to lay low. Thanks for what you had to say. Mine kind of gets into the business side of it. What's the cost, roughly, for a student in charter school? Do you know?
Do you mean what they earn or what they...
The cost to educate a student.
I don't have that. I can tell you roughly what they earn and how they earn their funding, and I can get that for you.
I'm trying to
cost, but-
relate the cost of charter versus traditional.
I mean, it's comparable, I would say. What we see is that charter school costs, they don't have necessarily all the resources of the school system, especially if they're under the commission, because the commission schools are treated as their own school system. So they sort of have a lot more responsibility than a locally approved charter school or just a traditional school that's under a district would have. They have to pay for their own facility. So sometimes it's more that the structure of their budget looks a little bit different, if that makes sense.
It does. So
I'll get you whatever you want. You just tell me what you want and we'll pull it. But that's my
the financial data would be
okay.
great.
So
That'd
you
be
want
good.
to know cost to educate a student in a charter school.
Yep, we'll get that.
Got it.
Thank you, Representative. Let us move on for time purposes today. And I also want to thank Lauren. Great job you're doing, and thank you for the presentation. This information she has produced, such as all the others, should already be in your email box. Courtney's doing a great job of sending this to you. If you would allow them to email you or call you and ask other questions. Thank you, Lauren. Great job.
Okay. Thank y'all for having me.
Yep. All right, on to, we've asked David Schaefer, which is the Vice President of Research and Policy, to come talk to us. This group is the Georgia Budget and Policy Institute. And we've asked, David, if you would present to us today on the education spending in Georgia, which your group does a very good job, not only looking at the state of Georgia, but I believe in the Southeast and maybe even beyond at educational spending and comparing. So I'll turn it over to you, David.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Irwin. We appreciate you letting us be here today. I am David. I'm filling in for Dr. Stephen Owens, our Director of Education. I'm going to set the stopwatch. I think I can win this because I'm a Georgia Bulldog, and I'm feeling good about the odds. All right. 3, 2, 1. Here we go. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit lightly about kind of the education picture in general. I know all of y'all have a pretty good sense of where we are in education funding. Our primary focus is the state of Georgia. We do take a look for comparison purposes, apples to apples at other states. We also, at times, try to contextualize that within the picture of federal spending. But to give you some top lines of what we're looking at right now, I wanted to tell you a little bit about who we are, what we do. Our mission is to advance lasting solutions that expand economic opportunity and well-being for all Georgians. And we want a fair and inclusive Georgia where all people can prosper. We are a 501c3. And let's talk real quickly about how Georgia stacks up. So a lot of what we focus on is just how children in poverty are doing and how K through 12 is impacting them and their families. So there's some things that Georgia's doing well. So on a fairness measure, we're looking at across the nation, we give about $795 more for high poverty schools, and that's per student per year. And so we rank 16th there, which is pretty good. On the adequacy level, we're looking at about 1,782 per pupil, which is actually below the national average. We're around 34th for that. And a lot of what we're looking at here is over time, school districts have borne more and more of the stress of student transportation, and that has really been hurting us in this area. And I think it's a known problem that schools struggle with. And then school counselor funding has also been a thing, and I know that the governor's proposed budget is aiming to even up that ratio a little bit, I think to 450 to 1 for school counselors. But these are some of the areas that we're struggling in a little bit across the state. And this is what it's looking like with a burden of pupil transportation. And you can see from 2000 till now, school districts are really struggling and groaning under the price of diesel. Everything is going up for all of us, but the school districts are bearing more and more of this. And it impacts different school districts differently. Obviously, for school districts in rural Georgia that might have to drive further to get students because population density is lower, they may be bearing more of a brunt of this. This is something that gets repeated in our superintendent survey every summer, that this is a struggle point. And these are the numbers that we're looking at that kind of underpin some of those survey responses. So we are an advocate of an opportunity weight, which would provide additional funding to districts that are experiencing higher poverty. We're one of 6 states that currently doesn't do this. I do note that HB3 is on the table right now. It's an option for possibly pursuing that. And we think that it's a real game changer for students across the state, that we really think about students that are walking through poverty and what the state's role might be in making that happen. And currently we're one of 6 states that doesn't do some version of this, and there's different ways of constructing that kind of poverty weight to put it into the QBE. We're also struggling a little bit on what we're calling the wealth grading curve. Another way of saying this, it's not our favorite term, but another way of this is used out there is achievement gap, and this is the difference in test scores between students who are in poverty and their wealthier classmates. We're not where we want to be, we think. Over the last 20 years, Georgia has been struggling in this regard, and we seem to be maintaining that difficult spot vis-a-vis the other southeastern states. So just wanted to lift that up, that it's something, as we talk about literacy, as we talk about other things, we want to talk about the role of poverty in that and what the options might be for the opportunity weight and other interventions. So to make the case a little bit, and that is that state investment pays off for low-income students, and that means it pays off for all of Georgia. So there's some brief statistics out there that finance reforms that brought more spending to low-income communities in terms of school districts. Those students earn higher wages over their lifetime, which of course then equates into higher funding rates in the tax coffers and so on. And there's also numbers that suggest a 21.7% increase in per pupil spending throughout all 12 school-age years really could go a long way to eliminating the education attainment gap, and this is from the Bureau of Economic Research. And I won't go through that text box there, but money matters. And of course, we've heard a lot of suggestions today that are true, that money matters where you spend it, not throwing money at a problem, but really being surgical in that approach. And again, the opportunity weight we think is a surgical approach to doing that, and really something that could do a good job of adjusting things. And then state investment in education in general pays off for all of Georgians. Really focusing in to make sure that students have equally high levels of performance regardless of race, ethnicity, and zip code. And economic status saves about an estimated $2.60 because of increased tax collections and the decreased need for social programs. And this is from the RAND Corporation. And we also wanted to lift up that if students, the United States were able to close the educational achievement gaps between native-born white children and black and Hispanic children, the U.S. economy would be 5.8% or nearly $2.3 trillion larger by the year 2050. And this is from the Center for American Progress. We're doing a lot of good things here. One of the things that we want to applaud the state for is TRS, and the state has consistently invested in TRS. This is a major factor in teacher retention. It is, I think, the highest compliment to our teachers to compliment them well, to help ensure that they've got pensions when they retire. So we wanted to applaud the state on this. We're doing better than most states in this category. Our pension hovers around 73% funded. It's a generous benefit for vested members, and it's got a significantly lower investment expense of 0.06% versus the national average of 0.44. So this is an area where the state has done a good job of serving its teachers, which means that the state is doing a good job in this regard of serving its students as well. And that is it for me, with the exception of questions that we'll be happy to receive. But I think I won this game, to be honest with you.
You did, David. Thank you very much, Mr. Schaefer. What I want to point out to the group, just a few words you said that I think are very important. We've just passed the amended budget. We mentioned and clapped for it in the chamber today about QBE is fully funded. And we need to be proud of that. The state of Georgia needs to be proud of that. We also need to be proud that we got some information here saying that there is some lagging indicators inside QBE that need addressing. Transportation, counseling. So what you said in the words of money matters and surgical, I appreciate that. I appreciate your knowledge. Again, this is going to be shared with you, members, for you to look at. I suggest in all of these that you've seen, go back and review through them a little bit. putting together where your passion is and where we can make a difference for our young people, because money does matter in education, there's no doubt. With that, I see some buttons, and we'll start with the first one I saw push right when you started talking, number 10, Representative Wade.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. I'm a Baptist, so your brevity is impressive. The transportation piece, so I'm a former school board member. Over the last 15 years, we saw locally a increase in the total cost, but a reduction in usage by the entire student body. I don't know if you have any data about total usage on buses statewide. I'm just curious about that. We can get together on a future date, but that's what we experienced in my region and my district. Not a huge decrease, but substantial decrease over a 15-year period. And then my question is, so I want to make sure I understand clearly one of the most, I think, important slides. You said we are 16th as it relates to funding for students that are in poverty, $795 over the national average, and we technically have a formula that doesn't even include a weight for poverty. So we're already within grasp if we make what I think you called a strategic change or a tweak to the funding formula that might give a weight. Did I interpret that in the method you intended for us to hear?
I think so. I'll do my best to answer the question, and it's a great question, by the way. And to be honest, we can do a follow-up conversation on usage. I think that's a good point. I don't have the data on hand to respond to that directly. So yes, Georgia's doing a relatively good job on having more poverty for individuals in schools. The discrepancy kind of comes, what you see on this slide is that overall our funding per pupil is lower. And the other piece of this that may indicate that while we're doing a better than average job on funding for higher poverty schools, is it getting it done is another part of the question. Have we pushed the rock enough to get it over the top of the hill, or at least let it set on top like we want it to be? And we're not so sure, to be honest with you, and that is borne out here. And this is the distance between wealthier students and less wealthy students in terms of achievement. And so we are seeing that there is possibly an additional need for funding to try to close that. So this is where we wanted to kind of point up, but your point is a good one.
Can you share with our chair like what specifically the states beside us are doing in that regard? So I think that would be information that would be beneficial to this committee.
So one option, and I'll try to not make you crazy with flipping maps, but to kind of talk it through for a moment. One option is the opportunity weight or a poverty weight as it has been described, which is built in the QBE formula to offer additional funding to districts in poverty. And if you jump back, since we're only one of 6 states that does not have this, you will see that Alabama does, South Carolina does, Tennessee, North Carolina, Florida does not. So I haven't run the beta tests and all the things that we might want to do to firmly establish that causal connection. But we think that this is one of the lowest hanging fruits in the policy arena for making that gap more narrow. And we think that our sister states around us are possibly doing a better job because of this reason right here.
Thank you. Number 11. Representative Maynor.
Thank you, Chair. Kind of piggybacking on what the chair said earlier, since we are fully funding QBE, I'm assuming based on your first slide that we will do better in that aspect of how we're funding right now. So my question really is in regards to the transportation piece. The state in general is moving towards electric vehicles. Has any research been done on if we were to focus on electrifying our school buses to kind of decrease that gap in funding for the transportation?
It's a great question. I do not know personally, and my father worked for Bluebird Bus Company for 20 years in Fort Valley, so it's very dear to my heart on how we get children to and from school. The issue we might run into, and this is just me surmising a little bit, is that state funding has remained flat. So to invest in new technologies is also expensive in its own way. And I know at least where I live in Cobb County, we've got buses that run on CNG. I think there's a little bit of hybrid out there too. But all of that stuff costs money, and it's all got to be maintained. So if the cost of diesel fuel is the key issue, then sure, it might adjust things accordingly. But what we're seeing here is flat state funding and overall increasing costs. And I'm sure some of these districts include places that are doing some of those things, exploring new technology. But on average, this is really hard on school districts, and we get the same results year after year with our superintendent survey. And they're telling us what they see. And then the numbers here kind of show us why.
Thank you. Let's see, Representative Evans, number 12.
Thank you, Chairman. So going back to the issue of the weights for the opportunity weight for poverty, one thing I know that we do is the equalization grants, and I think I've read that our equalization grants have flattened some this year. So if we were to tweak with the QBE formula and put in an opportunity weight, would we perhaps not see funding for equalization grants? I mean, I don't know. Is that a possibility, or?
It could be. I'm going to read this explanation because I think it's, if I don't read it, I'm going to get it wrong. So if y'all can bear with me. Equalization helps make sure that two districts with different property values have similar funding amounts. But if District A has 80% of their students in poverty and District B has 20%, then equalizing the funding will keep District A at a disadvantage. For this reason, we need additional funding to support the differences between students within each district. And that unfortunately is why equalization doesn't quite get us across the finish line. And again, we're talking about surgical interventions. If we know where the data are, if we know where those individuals walking through poverty and the children that are experiencing it are, then focused investment through something like the poverty weight built into the opportunity weight built into the QBE, we think is a good approach to be wise stewards and make those things happen that we see on the map.
Great, thank you. Good question, Representative Evans. I'm going to take one more. We keep lighting up. I want to get to our last presentation, make sure he has the opportunity. So one more question, if you would. Number 25 over there, Representative Townsend.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess transportation, local systems still have the opportunity to buy school buses and things like that with SPLOST, right? eSPLOST?
I don't know. It's a good question.
And just question that, because that's one, from my understanding it is, and that's another avenue of funding for local school systems. And that was a big, other question is regarding the poverty issue. I know we're running out of time, and I know it's a concern, and looking forward to working with you.
Thank you. Can you see him afterwards then for your other questions? Thank y'all. What we'll do is, thank you, Mr. Schaefer. Appreciate your information. If you've got a few minutes, we only have one more presentation. There might be a member or two that would like to speak to you. Thank you for your time and your knowledge. We'll see what we can make use of. On to our last presentation, Metro Atlanta Chamber. As you know, one of the initiatives this year for not only the governor, but many of us is workforce in this state and what we can do. So we've asked the Metro Chamber to come in. Tim Carroll is the Senior Director for Talent Development. So proud to have you here, Tim, and we'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm glad to be with you today. I'm going to reiterate what the chair said earlier. I have a lot of data. I'm only going to touch very, very briefly on each of these, but I'm happy to answer questions, talk with you later, send these to you individually, whatever you need to walk through this. So I'm going to preface it with that. Just some background. Some of you may already be aware of this, the current state of the market and where we are as a state. We are at a record number of job quits, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that a little later. On the causes, burnout, similar to what we hear from the teaching profession, is across every profession. And that's, there's been a little bit of a priority on what workers are choosing for why they pick an employee, why they pick an occupation, why they pick an employer to work for. This is not necessarily news, and then I want to add on top of this that our state has been really good we have been successful at economic development and growing and supporting business opportunity here. For those of you that don't know, the Chamber itself is an economic development organization. We're 164 years old, represent almost 1 million employees across the state. And so we are very focused on the economic development aspect. And of course, this committee has a huge play in how successful we are. I want to just share some numbers. You know, we've had a record unemployment rate, a recordly low unemployment rate for a number of years. I want to come back to this idea of a quit rate. This has been in the news a lot. I also want to re-emphasize this particular part. This is not a new trend. Since 2009, those employees who are quitting to move to another profession or another job has been steadily increasing. But what happened is when we hit 2021, we hit a slip and slide, and that rate started to go up exponentially. So that is where you're seeing a lot of news reports happen, a lot of job changeover and turnover in the markets when it comes to where employees are choosing to be employed. The average annual growth in degrees on what Georgia institutions are conferring, and that's at all levels, is still at a positive rate. However, it has slowed. So you have these convergence of a high labor participation rate, low unemployment, quit rates, and a slowdown in the number of degrees that we're conferring are leading to a very tight labor market. And I'm going to talk a little bit about where Georgia stacks up. I want to reemphasize this other part. When it comes to employment, this is the number of people who are in a job. Georgia's doing really well. When you look at the national the national rate for employment, Georgia has done pretty well in this spot. Here is where we have a little bit of a concern. Georgia in the past, particularly since about 1996, was really successful at luring people to come live here and work here, start a family here, start a business here. What we've seen in data over the last 5 years is that all of our metros, with very few exceptions across the U.S., are those in-migration rates, people coming from other states to live and work in other states, is slowing. So what that means is that reliance we had on people moving here to fill jobs, particularly critical jobs, has slowed. We can't sit there anymore. We still have a decent amount of natural increase, people that are born and going to school here and going to college here and then staying here for work, but those will not cover where we sit right now. I want to talk a little bit about industries. So on this data point, I'm going to share a little secret with y'all. This data that you're looking at that you see in front of you is a red carpet preview to our talent supply report. This is a supply and demand report we have done every 2 to 3 years. That'll be out later this year. You are getting the first look at this. One of the things that we look at are job postings. Where are people actually advertising for jobs, and what are those industries? And you can see here there's some pretty substantial growth across industries. Some of them you already have heard of, like healthcare and manufacturing. We also have substantial growth in administrative support, on professional and science, and particularly in the IT sector, all the way down, and you've got a pretty good layout of what those top industries are. There's a change here from 2017, which you see in the black, to 2021, which you see in the red. On the next slide, we're going to add in occupations inside those industries. Entry level occupations, those that are not necessarily listing any type of degree, a 2 or 4 year degree to that entry level. Registered nurses still sitting at the top. And then you see we've got tractor trailer. And if you slide on down almost to the bottom, you see that massive growth in software development and IT. I want to emphasize here, too, that when we talk about IT, this isn't necessarily somebody working for an IT company. If you have been out in East Georgia and seen any of the agricultural pilots that they're doing where the tractors are being driven by no one except an iPad or a drone that's circling overhead, those are all IT-related jobs. So this spans across a number of industries, but the function is the same. And that's a really important distinction to make. I think in the past we have traditionally siloed students into CTE programs or career pathways that seemed like they were all emphasized on one industry. That is no longer the case. Those apply across a number of industries. So I just want to put that picture out there for you. Now let's talk about Georgia conferees. These are degrees and certifications of all types that Georgia is putting out from our institutions. We see a nice, healthy number one spot for health professions. There's been some shift in the middle, but most of it positive. The IT and computer science is still remaining quite high. We'd love to see some more growth in some of these other sectors, but I just wanted to paint this picture for you of where the growth is coming on the employment side and what we're conferring, and that this is where our analysis and our data walk sits, is in that gap that we see between the two. I want to reemphasize, we talked a little bit earlier about the success that Georgia has. There is no doubt that you talk to any company who has chosen to expand or relocate of any size in Georgia, one of the absolute assets that Georgia brings to the table are the number of higher ed institutions we have across the state, and those include our 2- and 4-year colleges and our HBCUs. When we have our folks who travel around the world talking to companies, that is something that they want to know and they want to look at. They look at our institutions of higher ed and the access to talent that those companies would have if they either move or expanded here. Now I want to talk about how does the chamber work at bridging a couple of these gaps. So we have this set of degrees that we're conferring. We have an employment increase that is far above that. What does the chamber do in that space? We learn from who is doing it better, to be honest. We talked a little bit in the last presentation about what other states were doing. We look at what other chambers are doing and what other industry sectors are doing. I put a couple of these examples in here. I'm only going to touch briefly on these. Houston and the energy sector has been very successful at increasing the number of students who are obtaining certifications and 2-year degrees in the energy sector. We spent time with the folks in Houston. We are working with our investors already on modeling some of those better practices. And the second one is on Kentucky. Kentucky is interesting because they've got a lot of different employers involved in this, and this is a statewide effort. Theirs is fascinating. The thing that I want to set these apart is we hear a lot about schools need partnerships, right? They need employers to partner with schools. But if the employer doesn't know what their own hiring needs are, what their own skills and certifications are required for those high demand jobs, and by skills and certifications, particularly on the skills side, well, this is something that we have been working closely with our investors on. How many of you seen a job posting in the last, let's say 2 years? You've read through any type of job postings at all. You've probably seen really generic terms like communication skills. What does that mean for that job? This is a deep question because if you ask employer A for a job that is called analyst number 1 and they say, I need somebody with good communication skills, employer A is going to say, in communication skills, I need them to be able to write business communications, sit down and write a letter, write a good email on behalf of a department. Great, got that. Writing skills. The other person might mean, oh, I need them to look at a set of data and then interpret it and tell me what it means in a very short, concise way. That is a different type of communication skill. So these are the things that we work through with our employers that then can turn around to work with our schools to develop out curriculum that meets that specific requirement need. So do you understand the detail that we're diving into with some of our employers on this? We have learned this from these folks like Houston since 2014 and Kentucky since 2017, who've been at this a little bit longer than we have. And we're now trying to reshape and think how we do through those things. For what it means to this committee, I don't think for those of you that have known me a while, you know that many of the things on this list are things I've been talking with you about for almost 9 years now. Investments in early education not only fits through success in K-12, but fits directly into workforce and how parents are able to access and go to work and have access to high quality early education. And the Child and Parent Services program that we have here in Georgia is absolutely key to making that a success. Investments in computer science and experiential learning. Computer science, I don't think needs an explanation based upon the numbers you've got in the packet in front of you. But on the experiential learning, this is a really core part of not just K-12, but also any type of post-secondary. That is the experience that student gets that is inside the workplace, whether that is taking a tour of a facility or an office or an agribusiness, or actually spending time on a project. Those capstone projects, those classroom-based projects that we're seeing in some of our innovative schools, absolutely essential if we're setting those students up for good employment success once they leave their education. The support for early college work-based learning, this is another one, not waiting until the end of a college experience for the student to get involved in a workplace of any kind. And then the last one, which is expanding access in the to and through post-secondary. The college completion grants that were put into place last year, we are a huge fan of these, that if the state has invested 12 plus years into a student, it doesn't make sense that we would let a small dollar amount take that student off track. And so those grants are absolutely necessary to not only help the student and their family get that success, but it's to protect the state investment. So that was a very fast run. I've included my contact information. This is my email and cell in here. This is also our entire public policy team that is down here working on this on the day-to-day basis, and we're happy to talk with you through any questions.
Great. Thank you, Tim. Good job there. Good information. I see quite a few questions, so if you'll stay there at the podium, and remember as you're asking your questions, this is what's keeping us from getting in the car to get to the family now. So just be aware. Number 28.
Thank you, Mr. Chair
Thank you.
and Vice Chair.
Some people are doing that better than others.
All right. So workforce excites me because I relocated to this state through a company, auto company. I won't mention their name. And they invested a lot of money bringing jobs back to this country. And in Georgia, they focus on hiring 30% of their workforce into that company out of college. What strategies are you seeing some of your members do to encourage that, and also look at competing states that have been successful in recruiting a workforce out of state?
So let me make sure I understand your question. Like, how are companies recruiting inside our institutions of higher ed?
Well, not just higher ed, but also trying to bring jobs from overseas, because outsourcing is really huge, right? So that's one area. And the other thing is competing with cities like ours. How do we attract more talent into Georgia?
Well, one is you double down on the assets. So Georgia, and particularly the metro areas, I'll speak specifically since that's my coverage area, is Atlanta Metro. When we are up against other cities and we're able to say we have Georgia Tech, Emory, Georgia State, the AUC campus schools, the HBCUs, and the host of technical colleges that we have inside the metro area, that is a massive advantage when we're going up against even some very larger than us metro areas that do not have that asset. So I'll say that is number one. Two, it is the state's long-term both investment and attention to higher ed and K-12. So this goes all the way back to 1984 when the QBE was first put in place. That was revolutionary for the time, as was Hope Scholarship about 10 years later. So Georgia had a reputation already of being the state that was going to push forward on education. But I think the challenge we've got ahead of us now is a lot of those things that got us that advantage need a refresh. Like sort of like the what's next, right? Or to what end. I think that is the big challenge for us. We continue to double down on Georgia. That whether that's through Choose ATL, which is our external marketing program to try to bring young talent here, or whether that's working directly with our investors on expanding out things like how do they move from requiring a 4-year degree to not a 4-year degree that focuses on skills. So it's all of those things that can make expansion a better opportunity for our investors.
Great, good question. Number 15.
Thank you, Chair Irwin.
Thank you.
I am excited to be in this. Workforce housing, former teacher. My question is, how do we need to have this collaboration between business and our workforce from high school to collaborate earlier so that our students know what are the jobs that are in the marketplace, what those skill sets are, and then where are the access points in their community. I see a whole range of opportunities for counselors, talent, for lack of a word, talent folks who are trying to fill that gap, and parents along with our manufacturers and business communities to come together. Aerotropolis Atlanta is doing a great job in helping that, and they have just done that. Can we expect more of those type of collaborations to happen? And it certainly, we want it to happen in rural Georgia all the way up into urban Georgia.
I think you can. That's a great question. What you're seeing now, so I'll use some anecdotal evidence. One is when you look at the highest demand jobs, those that have the most posting, and if you just did a trend line on who's requiring, specific degrees, and then who is actually building out more skills for that. That's a very key thing when you're going to work with, particularly at the high school level, when you want to say, if not just critical thinking, but being able to analyze a set of data and break it down. That's a different type of partnership conversation than it is if you just have a school that says, we want to sponsor something at the school. If you want to have a business sponsor something at the school. So what we have pushed on to our members is to think beyond that mindset, to think beyond sort of the old passive ways of doing those partnership ideas. And it is a challenge for school systems, and I'm being completely real. It doesn't matter how well resourced a school district or an individual school is. It is a lift to do a heavy partnership. All you have to do is look at a STEAM or STEM certified school and realize the long, hard work it took to get that type of partnership in place. But what I think you can do is you can do the simple things. You can do the field trips. You can have professionals come in the classroom and talk about what they do on a day-to-day basis. It's all of those sort of light touch things and that lead into those deeper partnerships that would lead into something like a curriculum redevelopment or would lead into a new CTE pathway in a high school or middle school. So I think there's stair steps to what you're talking about, but I think it's important that school districts attempt to do that and that they find the right business partner to bring along with them on that journey.
Great. Again, thanks, Tim. Let's go to one last question for the day here, number 16.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This sheet here, slide, Georgia most preferred programs of study. Number 4 was computer and information. Number 12 was Homeland Security. Where does cybersecurity fall?
It technically falls across several of these things. So it would depend on the type of certification that the student is going for and how that certification is classified. I'll be happy to send you maybe a deeper dive into that. But as with any IT related thing, it's not going to fit neatly into one category.
Sure,
it's going to spread across.
It encompasses, and I saw a huge growth area as well that you showed us as well. So if you could get us that's very important because the Homeland Security really stood out.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Tim, thank you very much. Good presentation. As I think all of us are aware up here, Tim's here on a regular basis and available to us. So thank you for that. And if you've got other questions, please catch him. Let me do a little cleanup before we go here. Let me thank all the presenters, and y'all help me thank them. Your knowledge, your willingness to come and fight the traffic and the weather goes noticed. So please allow us to communicate with you as we're trying to do what's best for this great state of Georgia and the children, and your knowledge transferred to us is so valuable to us. So Thank you, group. One assignment that I mentioned was our subcommittees are going to meet on Mondays. We have a standing time from 1 to 2 o'clock. We're going to start out slow, as I mentioned, with the amount of bills we have. We have 2 bills to look at on Monday, HB 81 and HB 87 is the other, those two. HB 81 is going to be in curriculum. So if you're on the curriculum subcommittee, that's yours. That'll be at 1 o'clock. I would expect it to go quick. So HB 87 will come up about 1:15. So if you're on that committee, please come by that time at 1:15. It'll be in this room. We'll move it quickly. I'm very proud of our group. Number one, staying so engaged with the number of questions you have. And I mentioned it as we began about the importance of us being a team and working together as a team to do what's best for Kids First. So I see that already happening in this room and proud of that. Let's continue that in the chamber as we walk by each other and talk about what we're doing and what we need to do. And I appreciate that from you to me, but let's do it between each other too in the chamber. Now, I think that'll be valuable to us. With that, I've got dead on 3 o'clock, right when we were supposed to, so we need a hand. All right. See y'all. Be safe. Thank y'all for coming.